Polymorphism is a big word for a concept that is unique to object-oriented programming, but it's not that complicated to understand in an abstract way. The time that it gets difficult is when you start to implement it. So let's say I have a class called shape, and shape is a generic. It doesn't have to be any shape in particular. It's just a shape. And shape has something called color. That has a property called color, and it's red to start with. Now I can create subclasses of that called square and triangle and circle. In each of those subclasses, I have the opportunity to override the color. So, and that is what polymorphism is referring to. It is referring to the fact that I can create subclasses that override or change what might be in the base class. So let's take a look at that in code really quickly. So if I have a class called shape, and we're not going to base that on anything, but let's, in this, we will set a color. Okay, so now whenever I create a shape, I have to tell it what color it is to start with. And I'm also going to give it a type of shape, and we'll call this one just generic because it's a generic shape. We won't do any methods right now because shapes don't necessarily do anything, but we could do methods in a very similar way. You can also override methods for different shapes. Actually, we'll just leave it at properties for now. So I'm going to create a class called square. And I am going to base it on a shape. So it's got a color and a type. Now you can see type is statically created inside the constructor here as generic. So if I want it to be something other than generic, I've got to override that. So I'm going to create a constructor for this. And in this case, I am not going to do anything else just yet. And I'm going to say type equals square. And you can see here that it doesn't like something I'm doing. And what it wants me to do is this, because remember, this is requiring me to provide it with a color. When I create a shape, I have to give it a color. You can see here that so far I haven't done anything to tell it what color it's going to be. So I have to find a way to pass that color to the superclass. And the way I do that is through the super function, super dot init. So I'm referring to this, and I'm going to give it a color. Now I could give it a static value, like the string purple. That'll work just fine. If all my squares are purple, no problem. I could also pass this value by adding it here, right? str color, in which case I'm going to pass that straight through. Let's create another class called circle. And since I've already done the work here of creating that, let's just use it again. There we go. And this is a circle. And circle is going to have an additional property called radius. Okay, so the way this works is when I instantiate, let's say, a circle, I have to give it a color, because then that color is passed to the initialization, which is required here for shape, and then it's set as color, which is then inherited back down to circle. So it feels complicated, but once you get the idea of it, it's not too bad. Circle, and let's say it's blue. And then print my circle dot color. Wait a second. That should work. Haha. That's what it is, self.color. I forgot myself. Totally selfless. Just kidding. If I didn't have dad humor, I wouldn't have any humor at all. All right, so let's run this. All right, and so there we go. All that work just to print out the word blue. Seems a bit circuitous, but it does work. And here's the interesting thing. Your little debugger sidebar here has a new symbol in it. The nice thing about this is that when you have this little blue circle with the down arrow, it's going to show you what classes this is connected to downstream. So if I want to say, okay, is there any class that's a subclass of shape? I click this, I click square, and it takes me to that subclass. So I can actually start to see the connections in my program, which is very, very useful. Okay, so that's what that symbol is over there, and that's in PyCharm, of course, not everywhere you see Python. But so that is how polymorphism works. So polymorphism is referring to the fact that this type, we can inherit some things, right? But they are overridden in cases where it's self.type. If we have the same variable in a child class, we're going to override that. So that's what polymorphism, it basically means some things are the same, or things are inherited unless you override them with something different. Okay, and this is how We use super when we are constructing a class that requires a parameter. We have to use super to invoke that constructor and give it the value that it's looking for, or else we're going to have an error when we run our code. Okay? So that is polymorphism and sort of the critical ideas around that.